The people of Elsipogtog have done their very best to not only survive but thrive under conditions that have not always been favorable. As one of their residents, who after earning championships in the QMJHL as well as the AUS, has decided to enter the next phase of his life as a champion for future generations of Mi'kmaq as their struggle for inclusion continues. Trey Lewis, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, Trey, let's go back to the beginning. Now, you're not from Elsipogtog proper. You're actually from nearby Aldouane. Tell us a little bit about growing up in Aldouane and how you first fell in love with the game.
Yeah, well, like you said, it's just outside of Elsipogtog. I'm a member of the Elsipogtog First Nation, but grew up just outside in a small little town of Aldouane. I think we've got an outdoor rink and a grocery store, and that's about it. There's not too much going on around here. As far as hockey, I've been in love with hockey since as long as I can remember. I don't think that's too dissimilar to most of the kids around here. I mean, small town New Brunswick, there's not too much to do in the winter, so we got to hit the outdoor rink, I guess.
Now, I know we've talked in the past, and you did mention that growing up, although there were a couple of incidents, one in junior, one in AUS, that have been a little more widely documented. You were quite fortunate in terms of confronting racial prejudice or anything of that nature, but also you were. Did you think that maybe helped guide you along in as much as it just made their road a little bit easier for you? And looking back, are you a little bit surprised that you were, I'd say, fortunate, but you didn't face as much prejudice as some others might have?
Yeah, I think I'm definitely fortunate. There's a lot of people throughout Canada and throughout the U.S. as well. A lot of Indigenous people that face racism every single day. Growing up, I can't, like you said, I can't point to too many instances where I faced it myself. Like you said, I faced it in junior, and I faced it at the AUS. And as hockey players growing up, we definitely face it a number of different ways. But I think maybe I was probably just too young and oblivious to a lot of the stuff that was happening. And, now that I'm older and I've matured and I've kind of got a different outlook on things, it's the more I learn, the more alarming the racism that's still present is. And, it definitely needs to be addressed.
Now, back at that time when you faced those couple of incidences, thankfully isolated on the ice, you had mentioned that you were an advocate for strong suspensions, really doing just something to punish those that had crossed you in that way. Looking back at it now, especially now that you've sort of taken on the path that you're on now, do you see any benefit maybe to not only say a punishment per se, but maybe adding an educational component in there, simply because the people who would have crossed you in the past may not have even been aware of the undertones of racism that they were directing to you?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it definitely needs to be a harsh punishment. I was happy with the way the Q had and the AUS too had handled the situations. I got a phone call from the player, and he apologized. And at the time, and I still think to this day that especially on the ice, guys get heated, and situations get heated, and guys say things that they don't mean in the heat of the moment. And I really like the idea of having an educational component to the punishment. And, that was always going to be my suggestion from here on out for guys that commit these offenses. Don't just punish them. It could make them angrier and commit it more in the future. I'd like to sit down with these kids and explain to them the history of what happened to, certain peoples in Canada and in the US, and, educate them. And I really think that'll get compassion out of these players, and I think they'll get some empathy out of them. And it'll be a learning experience rather than just a punishment.
And Of course, we'd be remiss without talking about some of the positives that you encountered on the ice and in the queue. Of course, there were a good many of them. Take us back to 2013 with that powerful Mooseheads squad. You were co-captain, led them to a President Cup, an unprecedented regular season, then the President Cup, and of course the Memorial Cup. Thinking back now, hoisting that cup first on Halifax ice, and then the even bigger prize in Saskatoon that year. Do you find those experiences sort of seeping in as almost a teaching moment or an educational moment in your current life?
Oh, for sure. And I think hockey is a big part of the reason that I am an educator. I've been in love with hockey, and hockey's been my number one passion forever. And to complete my career and find a different passion outside of hockey, helping my community and helping the youth in my community. I think I wouldn't be able to do that if I hadn't gone through the experience that I had with Halifax and, the Memorial Cup and the President's Cup and all those life experiences. The more I think about it, the more grateful I am for all those experiences. I wouldn't be anywhere close to the person I am today if I didn't have those learning moments. They taught me how to be a better person, and I'm trying to take that forward and pass that on.
Now, you did mention that, of course, your say awareness, but you're more of a fight, a crusade for more inclusion. Really didn't ramp up until really your university days and beyond. But going back to that Memorial Cup, were you at all surprised, or did it reach you in some way, taking the cup back to Elsipogtog in the Aldouane area and seeing that support with your own eyes?
Yeah, I don't think it really hit me at the time, how important that was and how big of a deal it was. There are definitely memories that I'm going to cherish forever. But, the older I get, I think they become even more cherished because, I think that was a big moment for myself for sure. But I think it was a big moment for my community as well. And, now that I'm working in the school, in our home community, the youth in our communities and a lot of First Nations across Canada, they need to see people from their community succeed. And if I can be somewhat of a role model for the kids in my community, I'm absolutely so grateful for that. And it's definitely, the older I get, the more I appreciate those experiences and what I bringing those cups back to Elsipogtog.
Your journey back to Elsipogtog is actually very interesting. Of course, you obtained an education degree at UNB. Of course, you also earned an additional hockey championship with the Reds there. But before that, you actually went to St. FX. You hold a business degree as well as an education degree. It's not the most common combination that we see. What compelled you to go first to one and then to the other?
Well, when I was first finishing my junior career, a really good friend of mine, he's still a brother to this day, was Brad Cusner. And he had already been playing at St. FX. He's a year older than me. And, I hate to say it, but I think Brad Cusner was probably the number one reason I was at St. FX. And St. FX was, it's a very famous school. And, I absolutely loved my time there. And St. FX is a business school. And I guess I just kind of went along with, the St. FX being great for business. And I felt I should take that opportunity while I had it. And I had always been fairly good in math, which I was kind of hoping that business was math focused. And, it just kind of happened that way. And then once I had completed my business degree, I had enough math courses and I'd also taken enough history electives where I was able to transfer that over to education and complete an education degree at UNB. And actually, probably somewhere in the middle there, between completing my business degree and moving on to education, I got a taste of coaching. So I did a bit of coaching with the Aboriginal team for New Brunswick. And, combining education with hockey was just, it felt so good for me. And then that was kind of when I realized, hey, I could take these things that I like about hockey and what I enjoyed about coaching, and I can move that into the classroom and try to make a difference.
Now, obviously, people don't associate the two worlds, the business world with the fields of education. Is there a lot that maybe the average person may not realize at first glance that you take from that business degree that you obtained and actually transverse into the world of education? How much does those educational materials cross paths?
I think it's a little more than people think. One example I use, I talk all the time about ways to help our Indigenous youth, and probably the biggest thing is they need some role models. They need to see Indigenous people succeeding, and I think a great option for some Indigenous people is entrepreneurship and going into the business field. I use a good example of Shark Tank and Dragon's Den. If you were to see, if a youth were to see an Indigenous person on there and succeeding, and that's a great option for them. For maybe they're not set out to go to university or post-secondary education. Maybe that isn't for them, but maybe they really do have a passion that they can turn into entrepreneurship, turn into a business. I think business and entrepreneurship is so important for First Nations and Indigenous youth.
And of course, we've seen that with your good friend Sawyer Hanna and his recent win on Dragon's Den as well. So it's very true to your point. So Trey, tell us a little bit about life at Elsipogtog School 2020-2021. What levels are you teaching? And as well, what do you see with the children? What do you see with your students nowadays that are the biggest differences from when you were growing up in roughly that same area?
Yeah, so I'm teaching middle school math at Elsipogtog School. I teach grades 6, 7, and 8 math, which is good because that's after grade 8, math gets a little bit more complicated. No, but I've really enjoyed it. This is my first full year teaching, and it's definitely a strange year to have your first full year teaching. Just up until this week, we had only had half the kids on Monday, Wednesday, and then the other half on Tuesday, Thursday. So we've only had half of our classes in school on each day, and that changed this week. So it's been a hectic week, but I think it's just been a tough year for everyone. Right down from the principal down to the students. I think everyone's a little bit stressed out, and just the not knowing how this year is going to go or what next week's going to look like. I think it's been stressful on us all, but we're keeping our chins up, and it's been a great year. I've loved this first year teaching.
And of course, a lot of the kids that are in that classroom, they would have looked up to you. You were the role model. Back in your glory days with the Mooseheads and even through the AUS ranks. Going back to your time, we'll rewind a little bit here. Who are some of the people that you would have looked up to growing up in the Aldouane, Elsipogtog area?
Well, especially from Elsipogtog, everyone's role model was Everett Santapass. So Everett Santapass was a first-round NHL draft pick of the Chicago Blackhawks, and actually, after my junior career and more into my university career, I got to know Everett personally, and he's now a very good friend of mine. And to be friends with someone that you looked up to growing up is it's pretty crazy. And I think Jordan Tutu is still a role model for the kids that I'm teaching, and he was a role model for me growing up. To have the first Inuit-born NHL player. Representing the Indigenous people like that on the big stage. It was really a big deal to see him out there and having the success that he had.
And of course, two players with ties to either Halifax or the Q. Of course, Everett, very well-known QMJHL alumnus, and we all remember Jordan Tutu's coming out party at the World Juniors in Halifax. So two excellent people to take a lead from. Now that you're the person, though, that's taking the lead for future generations. Do you ever find perhaps sometimes your notoriety to these kids almost in a way helps you get your message across that you're trying to convey?
For sure. I mean, I definitely wouldn't want to be that person that just relies on my past successes, or, you know, points to my wins of the Presidents and the Memorial Cup to give what I'm trying to say meaning. You know, I definitely take pride in being down to earth and being able to connect with people outside of hockey. And now that I've moved on from my hockey career, I'm really trying to focus on being a different person than just hockey Trey Lewis. And that might sound a little weird, but I try not to rely on it, but it's also a great thing to have in your back pocket to say, hey, you know, I might know what I'm talking about. I did have some success throughout my life in other ways besides education.
No, it's absolutely, it's a valuable tool, and I'm sure there's a lot of other educators that wouldn't mind having a little piece of it in their back pockets as well. And finally, you've seen a lot in your time, both in the Aldouane area and you know your travels around the Maritimes. Where do you feel, from your position, where do you feel we as a society are at in terms of inclusivity? What would you like to see society in general doing to perhaps bring more awareness to something that's become very, very valuable to a lot more people in a very short period of time?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. There's just so many options. You know, there's so many things that we can do as a society as a whole that could make us better. What I'm trying to focus on, I guess, is the education aspect of it. One thing that I found growing up and right into my university career, and it took until I was choosing my own classes in university to really learn the history of Indigenous people, not just the Mi'kmaq people here in Elsipogtog, but the Indigenous people across Canada, across the United States. It took me until university to actually be able to learn the true history and the true horror of what took place. I mean, this entire continent was literally taken from Indigenous people. And, you know, sure, we're taught about residential schools growing up, and, you know, we taught when Columbus came over here, but that was kind of the extent of it in public school for me. And, you know, what I would just love to see is just more teaching of Indigenous history, Indigenous culture. I think returning to Indigenous ceremony, not only for Indigenous people, would be beneficial, but everyone. I think if we can return to some ceremony and some culture, some ancient Indigenous culture, I think it would definitely help society as a whole. You know, that's my focus. I think an increase in Indigenous history teaching and Indigenous ceremonies, I think that goes hand in hand with where education is kind of heading towards now, where a lot of mindfulness, a lot of teaching of the ego and the mind, I think they all kind of go hand in hand. And I think if, you know, we come together as a society, there's no reason why we can't improve.
Very well said, and I happen to agree. Hands-on education is the best kind, and hopefully, Trey, you will be able to be on the leading edge of that in the years going forward. For now, we thank you for your time, and all the best to you and all your students as well in the treacherous weeks and months to come. It's been a pleasure having you.
Perfect. Thanks for having me. Sorry.